listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is May 28th, 2023, and this is episode 227 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we'll hear part 3 of a 3-part interview with Barry Porter, who is a lighthouse keeper in Newfoundland, Canada, for 23 years and has written a new book called Adventures of a Lightkeeper. We're also going to have a segment about Browns Head Lighthouse in Maine. First, has anything interesting happened on this date in lighthouse history, Michelle?
Well, yes, Jeremy, since you asked. Fire Island Lighthouse was reactivated on May 28, 1986, after 12 years in darkness. It's been restored by the Fire Island Lighthouse Preservation Society, and it's open to the public. The tower is temporarily closed for repairs, but the museum on the site and a historic boathouse are open.
I was just there with the U.S. Lighthouse Society tour. It's a very beautiful spot and a great lighthouse. It's one of the tallest in the Northeast at 168 feet. So let's go to part 3 of the interview with Barry Porter. To introduce it, let's read what a few reviewers have said about Barry's book, Adventures of a Lightkeeper.
Sure, Jeremy. Jonathan Crow, the former co-host of the CBC program Here and Now, writes, quote, "Someone once said, 'We've all got a book in us.' If so, my friend Barry Porter has a whole library's worth of stories to tell. He's simply one of the most interesting people I know. From Long Point Lighthouse to Bacalao Island, you can almost smell the sea air and feel the stifling dampness of the fog as it closes in. This is an intimate look inside an important and demanding job that requires a tolerance for loneliness, isolation, and extreme weather. This is a writer in touch with the beauty and cruelty of one of the world's deadliest coastlines." End quote.
Stephanie Collins of Fireside Collections writes, quote, "This book was a relaxing and easy read, often enjoyed with a fresh, hot brew that opened my eyes to the adventures of remote living. Adventures of a Lightkeeper by Barry Porter is a great book that will whisk you away to another life during another time when lighthouses were manned by adventure-seeking, brave young souls who didn't mind being keepers of the light." End quote.
Nicole Little of Review at No Shelf Control writes, quote, "It is a fun read, full of interesting stories, interspersed with photos of Mr. Porter's time at various lighthouse locations across the province. He took part in daring rescues, endured the fiercest of storms, and even found love along the way. A wonderful, exciting, and fast-paced book, Adventures of a Lightkeeper, is one that I would recommend to anyone wanting an inside look into the life of the people who keep the light on." End quote.
My 2.5-hour interview with Barry Porter ties the longest I've ever done. It ties him with Gerald Butler, the Irish lightkeeper, who also wrote a book about his experiences. Barry and Gerald have a lot in common, and speaking with both of them was a rare pleasure. So let's listen to part 3 of my interview with Barry Porter now. So in general, it sounds like you got along pretty well with the other keepers you worked with, which was kind of a necessity. Do you have any particular secrets about getting along with people in isolated places like that?
I don't have any secrets, but you're out on a remote island for 4 weeks or 28 days or 32 days. If you don't get along with your coworker, you're going to have a long, miserable shift. I always tried to get along with my coworker. You know, each person should respect, each other's views and opinions, habits. It get testy sometimes, especially if it's bad weather and you're isolated. It can be trying at times, but I always got along with my co-workers, and you find something in common and go with that, right? And I don't know what the secret is, but I was successful with it for the best part. But I've heard stories, old stories over the years of lightkeepers at these stations that have fallen out. Canadian Coast Guard have had to fly counselors out to one station I know for, because the two guys they were just two stubborn people, but set in their ways and not willing to give. And I've heard stories way back at the family stations that the two keepers had fallen out, and they wouldn't communicate to each other. They would actually leave notes under their doors for today's work to be done or duties or something, right? Like just a terrible environment, right? But I tried my best to cooperate with whoever I was working with, the Lightkeepers, and plus you have mechanics coming out, technicians from St. John's coming out for a few days or a week to do work at the station. And life is too short. You got to try to get along the best you can.
Yeah. I was thinking the world at large could learn something from that these days, the way things are so polarized, mutual respect and finding common ground with the others. That's the keys. So you returned to Surgeons Cove Head Light Station as the full-time keeper in 1992. You ended up staying there for 10 years this time. And one thing you wrote about that is that, it was never the tourist attraction that Long Point was, right? But you were surprised at the number of people who got out to Surgeons Cove Head to see the place. How did they get there?
Yeah, Exploits Island is a quite popular place, especially in the summertime. A lot of boaters come there. It's got a really nice sheltered harbor in the middle. And like I mentioned, it was a resettled island. So a couple 100 years ago, there was 1,000 people living there. So there's a lot of summer cabins there, a lot of history. It was 3 churches. There's like 5 graveyards there on the island now, right? So you get a lot of boat traffic there, and a lot of those people hike out across the island, take the 1-hour hike that I used to do almost every second day when I was there. So you get a few hikers or a few people when conditions are good in the summertime, they come down in the gulch, down in the cove. And on a good day, you can tie up your boat there onto the cliff. But in the wintertime, you get skidoo, snowmobile activity, which the other lighthouses didn't have. When the Bay of Exploits would freeze up and you get the hardy guys packed in outside, you get safe conditions for a few weeks or a few months, right? And you get, when I went there in January of 92, that very first shift, I had more visitors in one shift as I had in 4 years entirely on Bacalao. But they come out from Lewisport, from anywhere from 20 miles to 15 miles to 10 miles and across the sea ice and then to Exploits Harbor, and then you'd have to come 3 miles through the country, through the island to visit the lighthouse. But they'd come out for a cup of tea or just a tour or a visit, and it was, it broke up the winter months for us lightkeepers. It was always good to see a face, and they enjoyed seeing the diesel. We showed them the diesel, the foghorn, and the lights. So it was unique with the snowmobiles. As long as the icebreaker didn't cut a channel inside, that happens sometimes as well.
Jeez, yeah. Your son Dylan and your daughter Sarah, right, were born during that stretch at Surgeons Cove. Did your wife and kids spend time out there sometimes?
Yes, a few times. Not Alice used to come in, before the kids, and then Dylan came out. Dylan was born in 92, and he came out a few times. Actually, his first steps he ever made in his life was in the kitchen at Surgeons Cove Inn. And I blame it on the floor because the lighthouses were clean, spotless anyhow. That was part of our duty, was keep it clean. But Surgeons Cove Inn had the shiniest floors in I'd say the entire Coast Guard system in Canada. It gleamed. We used to glaze it over every year. Plus, it was always mopped and swept. But when my little boy came out there, he was, a year old probably, or not quite, just starting to crawl. And he got on that shiny floor and he'd done his first steps there. He giggled as he went. My daughter, she was born in 96, so she didn't come that much, right? Because it was getting more difficult to get, it was a 20-mile boat ride, right? So it's difficult to line it up and shift work and the weather, right? So Dylan is the only one that really spent any time that he remembers for sure. But it was a treat to have your family at, right? Because you talk to them on the radio or like that was hard. It was being away from the kids, right?
Sure. Speaking of spending more time with your kids, you got to leave from lightkeeping in 1998 to spend more time with your family, right? How come you decided to do that?
Yes, I applied for that. That was probably another original move. No lightkeeper that ever applied before. It's called Care and Nurturing Leave. It's a clause in our contract with the federal government. And it's without pay, but you keep your seniority and you keep your benefits and all that. Well, I was missing my kids. You know, you go away on an island, you're gone for a month at a time. Kids are growing up, they're having teeth, they're having birthdays, you're missing special events. And I don't know, maybe it's because like I decided we chose to have kids later in life. Most of my friends had their kids early, but I was 36 when Dylan was born. I was 40 when Sarah was born. And I don't know if that made any difference, but like I wanted to spend some quality time with them. I didn't want to miss some of those valuable early years with them. I can remember coming home and being away for a month. And when I get home, my little boy, you know, he's probably 1 or 2, and like he'd be distant, like I was like a uncle for the first couple of days, right? And that used to break my heart. We talked about it, and my wife was, you know, still working pharmacy work, shift work, so it was difficult. She was a single mom every second month, right? So raising 2 kids. So I applied for this care and nurturing leave and went for it.
Yeah, well, good for you. Seems like a really good idea to me. So you returned to Long Point in 2002. You finished your career there, last few years there. And I'd like to just touch on the subject of ghost stories for a few minutes.
Yeah.
You get into some it's pretty fun stories you tell in the book related to that. First of all, your experience at Long Point Lighthouse in '84. Can you tell that one?
Yes. Went there in '84. Just took over this huge lighthouse, the big old dwelling built in 1876. Me and my dad got through the summer, all the tourists, and getting into the feel of looking after the lighthouse and taking pride in my job. And one of the first bad storms we had in the fall. 28 was terrible for wind. You're just on the very edge of the ocean. There's no break anywhere. And it had the big air horns, the big compressors blowing. And we had a storm brewing for 2 or 3 days, northeast wind, zero visibility, rain, fog, just miserable, right? And by now I'm living at the lighthouse. And I was doing a night shift. Midnight, I'd go on and do a night shift from 12 o'clock to 8 o'clock for the Saturday shift. And I remember, just terrible, nasty conditions, wouldn't go outdoors. And I went on shift 12 o'clock, so I went up, checked the main light, make sure that was on, but zero visibility, so it was absolutely useless in the fog. But I just go up, make sure that was operating properly. I checked the radio beacon. Long Point had a radio beacon. That was all good. And just a station check when you start the shift. And I walked down to this long tunnel, 125 feet, wooden frame tunnel, keep you out of the wind and the rain, a couple little side windows, a couple dimly lit bulbs. So I walked down there. It goes into the foghorn building, where that's where the Lester diesel, there was one Lester diesel on Long Point just for emergencies if the power went, and 2 big compressors there with the big air tanks. And I just opened up the big old wooden door and went inside, and there's heat on there, right? So it was nice and warm in there. I turned on the light switch and nothing. It's just a dead light. And, I was down there a few hours before that, during my day shift, and it worked properly, but the switch must have given out or all the bulbs blowed or something. Anyhow, I never had a flashlight with me, and the main light was flashing every few seconds. So you get a little flash through the light. So I just walked over the compressor that just stopped. As I was walking down the tunnel, the foghorn, the visibility must have improved to probably 3 miles. So the foghorn had just stopped, a couple minutes before I arrived into the building. And I looked out the window, it was, just fog and rain blowing, right? And, it was just a hairy, spooky environment I was in, right? And I turned around to walk out of the building, and when I was about to close the door, the only noise now was the whistling of the wind. But I thought I heard something when I was about to close the door. And I stopped in my tracks, and I'm hearing things, right? And before I got a chance to close the door, I heard the sound again. And I said, what the heck is that? And I just walked back a little closer. I couldn't hear it, couldn't hear it. When I got closer to the compressors and the end of the building here, I could hear this weird noise, right? and it's dark and it's blowing, and I'm straining trying to see where this noise is coming from, because it was foreign to me. I never heard it before in my life. And for some reason, 12 o'clock in the night, with the northeast wind and fog, my brain told me, or translated to me, I could hear, "Let me out, let me out." This is what I heard. And when I heard that, I just booted out of that building, slammed the door, up the tunnel, scared the wits out of me, because I thought I heard a voice. And I go back upstairs into my office and sat there. It was a Friday night, midnight, probably 1 o'clock in the morning now. And I was just, what the heck is going on? And, I had goosebumps. I was spooked. And I'm thinking to myself, holy frig, this is my first good storm. I'm here, I'm trying to keep a full-time job. And, if there's something going on here, I gotta find out what's making this noise, or what's going on. I was scared, but I was also determined. I had to bite the bullet and see what was actually going on then. So I let a little bit of time pass, half an hour pass probably. So I went and got a flashlight, took a hammer out of the tool shed. The opposite living room is now the tool shop, sort of, right? Little workshop in the opposite side of the lighthouse. So I took a hammer, a flashlight, my trusty Beagle Gypsy, and we walked down the tunnel and opened the door to the horn house again, and flicked the switch. Still again, no lights, which made it spookier. So I turned on the flashlight, and I walked over and I listened, and I could hear the noise, and I was braver this time. I wasn't quite so scared. And I was there for quite a while it only happened every few minutes. And finally, after much searching and soul searching, I determined the noise was coming from the darn compressors. The compressors were pumped up to the maximum air pressure. It was belt driven, and they're, if the visibility reduced another 500 feet, it would blast again, because it was just pumped to the max, ready to blow. But I guess it was the wind outside, the vibrations, whatever it was moving the belts on the compressor, and the compressor had a vent that used to go down in the floor. And I think the noise used to heckle down through there. And 12 o'clock in the night, it sounded like "let me out." And it was spooky, man. I tell you, it took me for a ride.
Yeah, I'd run too. You said when you went back to check it out, you had a hammer. Were you gonna hit the ghost with a hammer?
Yeah, I had no idea.
So I'm not sure that works.
No.
I do a lecture sometimes on Lighthouse ghost stories, and one of the things I say near the beginning is that there's no doubt that some of these stories can be chalked up to imagination, but I also have a very open mind on a lot of these things. And you actually had another strange experience at Surgeon's Cove in '92.
Yes.
Yeah.
That one was legit. If there is, it made a believer out of me. Yeah. But I went to work my very first shift. When I transferred from Bacalao back up to Surgeon's Cove in '92, the day I went there, chopper flew me up there. Arch, my co-worker, finished his shift 10 o'clock on Surgeon's Cove. Your shift is from 2 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning, from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock in the night. So you're covering one full day, basically, and you record it in your log. So I was going on shift 2 o'clock in the morning. It'd been a long day because the chopper flew me to both stations to get my belongings and to relocate at Surgeon's Cove. So 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, Arch finished his shift at 10 o'clock. He went to bed probably 11. So I just turned off the lights or dimmed the lights and was ready, preparing to go on shift for 2 o'clock in the morning. So, my internal clock was working pretty good. I didn't need a clock to wake me up at 2 o'clock, but I figured I'd catch a little nap before I go on shift. And we had a old-fashioned wind-up clock there, so I set the clock for 2 o'clock to wake up in case I overslept, which I never did. And I dozed off on the Chesterfield, still dressed, still on duty, basically, but just had a little nap before I went on shift. And at 2 o'clock, you go check the diesel generators had to be checked every 4 hours on these light stations, right? Because you could have a oil leak or you could have anything go wrong. That happened 24/7, right? Check your light and diesel generators every 4 hours, plus the weather conditions and whatnot. So I lay down for a little nap. It was a long day, and dozes off. And about 2 o'clock, I suppose to wake up to go to work. And anyhow, I'm on the Chesterfield and I'm asleep, but I'm also awake. And I feel like something's keeping me down. I couldn't get off the Chesterfield. It was weird. The only time I ever felt it in my life. I'm on the lid down on the Chesterfield trying to get up, but my mind is awake, but my body's asleep. Finally, I busted out of that trance I was in and jumped up and looked at my alarm clock right next to me on the floor, and it had stopped at 2 o'clock. The alarm didn't go off, but it had stopped at 2 o'clock. I checked my wristwatch, and it was 3 o'clock. I had slept in a full hour, which I've never done in my career, right? And it was just my internal clock. You get up at 2 o'clock easy after doing it for a few years. Anyhow, that was bad. I'd overslept the hour, so I was embarrassed and pissed off with myself because I slept in for a full hour. So I gets up, all out of sorts. I was feeling off. So going to start my shift. So I went over to the big kitchen window, living room window, slid up the window. You always open up the window and look right out at the ocean, right? You're almost 300 feet above sea level. So I slid up the window and looked in the bay, looked to the south. You can see 10 miles. And it was a nice clear winter's night, January. A few stars and the moon. And I'm looking out across the landscape over the heights. And I'm just scanning the horizon, and then I look out to the north where the light tower is, and I look up at the light tower, and the darn thing is black as your boot. The light had failed, and not only had the light failed, the backup system had failed. And so here I am, my very first shift. I'm panicking, slams down the window, Booth runs down the basement steps, out through the basement, putting on my jacket and my boots as I'm running. Goes over to the light tower, opens up the cast iron door, cracks that open, and climbs up the rickety steps in the tower. And I had a flashlight with me, and checking out the bulb. If the main bulb glowed, the light system was cocked. It had another spare bulb that if it burnt out, it would swivel across and connect and light up. That failed, and if that didn't work, there was another emergency light to the side that had a sensor on it that would come on. But all these backup systems totally failed, so I had to go reset the light, put a new bulb in it, go downstairs, flick a few switches, and get the light powered back. And thank God, it came back on. I breathed a sigh of relief, and I looked out over to the north, and thankfully there was no shipping on the go. It was in the middle of the winter. It was a slow period. There was no shipping, so nobody seen the lighthouse except for a few rabbits or a few seagulls, right? So I came back in and got myself a lunch, and I never closed my eyes, never blinked for the rest of the night. A bit mixed up, but also pissed off with myself because I'd overslept, but I couldn't understand what happened to the light and all this. And the next morning, my coworker got up 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, had his breakfast, and he went for a hike in across the harbor. And I never said a word to him because I'm still embarrassed about the thing because I couldn't make no sense out of what happened, right? So when he returned later that day, I cooked supper, and I couldn't keep it secret anymore. I had spilled the beans. And I told my coworker, I said, Archboy, I said, last night I had something happen to me. I never, I said, I slept in an hour, the clock stopped, and the light and the backup light all failed. And I'm guilty. I can't explain it. And Arch just chuckled and said, oh, well, that's seamy. And anyhow, this is a ghost at the lighthouse, a friendly ghost that apparently does this from time to time. The rookie lightkeeper, as this happened to him. And I never told a soul about it. I'd heard, before I even went to the lighthouse, I'd heard stories, just folklore and jokes about this ghost see me, right? It's a little known fact in the Bay, but I never had any experience about it, and people just joke about it, and non-believers. But whatever happened to me that night, this trance that I was in on the bed at Chesterfield when I couldn't get up, that's called a whole hay. That's in Newfoundland Irish folklore. It's called a whole hay, and that's what was happening to me. But for the light to go out, I cannot explain it. I got no explanation. My co-worker didn't do it. He was sound asleep in his room, and I never said a word about it except from my co-worker that day. A couple of years later, I mentioned it to another lightkeeper who had worked out there, and he said the same thing happened to him, and he's never repeated it. And I know for 2 other cases that has happened to. I cannot explain it, but it's see me, the friendly ghost.
Yeah.
And apparently, this lady, Seymour was her name. She died in the lighthouse just after it was built in the early 60s. She was a widow. Her husband had died, so she was ever living with the family. And she died in the lighthouse. And apparently she died in my bedroom. That's where she had her laid out. And I didn't know nothing about this. And she is now, this ghost is called See Me. And believe it or not, it happened to me, but I cannot explain. But it makes you wonder what's really going on.
So if her name was Seymour, does the See Me come from that, do you think?
Yes,
It does.
One of the Lightkeeper's kids couldn't pronounce her name, and he used to call her See Me, so that was her nickname.
Yeah.
And she died. She passed away out there, and they laid her out in the bedroom that she died in. It was the bedroom that I had picked when I went there that day. I cannot explain it. I don't think it's not a joke. It really happened to me, and
no, I believe it's not a joke. And as I said, I have a very open mind about these things. It's a big mysterious universe in many ways, for sure. So you did some relief keeping at Puffin Island Lighthouse. What was it like there?
Yes, 2003. They needed a lightkeeper right on Puffin Island. That's a little further down the northeast coast to the east. But I was curious to see the place and experience it, so I went out there for a shift. And Puffin Island is a much smaller island, very small. Bacalao was a small island, but Puffin Island was only the quarter of a mile long, right? Very small. And that was built in it was the oldest lighthouse that I had worked. It was built in 1876. It had a wooden tower where the other ones were there, the concrete or cast iron. But it's about a mile offshore from Greenspan, which was a big fishing, trading port in its day, right? But it was a very nice little house. And when I went there in May of 2003, the Coast Guard had decided to do a big refit to the island. So it was a complete construction zone when I was there. They were completely redoing the house, the whole dwelling. They stripped right down to the studs inside, re-insulated it, new wiring, plumbing, gyprock, and they were solarizing. They put in a big solar system to it, getting rid of the diesels. It's still a manned station to this day, but when I was there, it was 3 or 4 carpenters, a helicopter slinging supplies in every few days, right? But a really, really nice island. No sheer cliffs. It was just a rock in the ocean, right? And on the back of the island, they had a boathouse with a little slipway where you could put your speedboat out and take it back in again, right? So it was nice, right? And I had to run into, like I said, Greenspan was only a mile away. So I was a new kid on the block, so sometimes the carpenters would need more supplies and the chopper wasn't available. So I might run into the nearby town and pick up a box of nails or some supplies for the workers, right? But it was nice to see the place and experience the people there. The Lightkeeper on that island, they had a tradition of keeping a dog. Yeah, they always had a dog on the station. It was a really good place for ducks, saltwater ducks. In the fall and in the winter, they'd hunt ducks there. So they used to have their dog trained. They'd shoot the the ducks from the Highland. Too rough to put a boat out, but the dog would swim out and get their ducks for them, and that was a tradition that they had going on there for decades.
Yeah, every lighthouse should have a dog for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So you finished your career at Long Point. What made you decide to resign in 2006?
That's a good question, Jeremy. By now I had 23 years with the Canadian Coast Guard, and 23 good years. But I don't know if it was the gypsy in me, but I was starting to twitch. Time for a change again. And the last 3 years, when I returned to Long Point in 2003 to 2006, they'd given up. You weren't allowed to live on the lighthouse anymore. So that meant I had to commute again. So that was an hour and a half commute from Porterville to Twillingate, Long Point, and then back again in the day, right? And that makes for a long day, 3 extra hours driving, and the expense of the gas. And I did it for 3 years, and I was just getting burnt out with the commute, right? It just wasn't the same. I didn't have the love for it anymore. The driving was the main reason, and I could have transferred to the Coast Guard ships, but I still had that. The sinking off the ocean ranging still haunted me, so I didn't want to go offshore or on the ocean, right? So I just politely changed careers, packed it up, and moved on. Right, it was time for a change, and it was good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is your opinion of lighthouse automation and destaffing?
Well, I never did like it. I probably hold school. I probably still anti about destaffing or automation. My very first ship on Surgeon's Cove back in 1983, my worker Calvin Moore at the time said to me then, like, I was trying to get my foot in the door, start a new career, and my worker then told me, Barry, he said, there's no career here because this place could be automated any day. And that threat of automation hung over my head for 23 years. I was with the Canadian Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. And it's not a good feeling. And it was all controlled by Ottawa. I experienced it I went to Long Point in 84. In 85, there was some automation programs on the go. And I remember writing a letter into to the powers that be, stating the importance of Long Point, and it got delayed and went to another, a couple of lighthouses was automated. And then in the 90s, it was on the go again. And I just, I wanted a job. I was young and I needed a job. But I was against the principle of taking a man off a Highland with a radio and a set of binoculars and replacing it with a solar panel or a computer chip. It can't do the same. And I've seen it for myself. And electronics, it has improved, but there's still glitches. They still fail. Big ships still get in trouble. And in this area, where the lights that I worked on, a lot of people, depending on the lights, were small-time fishermen in small 17, 18-foot open speed boats who don't have the modern electronics, right? It has improved. And, when I went with the Coast Guard in 83, there was 56 man lighthouses. And over the years, there's down to 23 man lighthouses in Newfoundland, Labrador right now, right? But the Canadian Coast Guard finally put a freeze on it in 2011. I write about it in my book because, like I said, I was against it. And I even got a petition on the go back in the 90s to save Surgeon's Cove. And I did for it. They bypassed and went to another lighthouse. But back in 2011, the federal government done a study, the Senate committee done a study on lighthouse automation. And they put it down on paper that, we do save lives and we serve a purpose, and they put a halt to destaffing and automation. So I guess I was right a little bit.
Yeah. And, most countries, lighthouses, probably 99% in the world are automated at this point, and most countries have completely destaffed their lighthouses. So there's very few keepers in the world, basically, true lighthouse keepers these days. There are still more than 50 lighthouses in Canada that are officially staffed, including 27 in British Columbia, 23 in Newfoundland, 1 in New Brunswick for particular reasons. But why do you, well, you've kind of answered it already, why there are still so many keepers in Newfoundland, and you think that's going to stay that way for a while, right?
I hope so. You know, our coastline is so rugged, right? And the environment is can be so unpredictable. I like to see it hang around for more years, but you know, it's determined by powers elsewhere. And a lot of times, right? You know, I used to say it was politicians sitting in a house in Ottawa, 1,500 miles away from the ocean, making these calls. I guess to get feedback, but I was against it. And you know, if you can save one life, you know, you can't put a price on lives, right? But I know in my career on the lights that I saved some and prevented a lot of accidents for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure. A Lightkeeper was on watch, as you repeat a few times in your book.
Yeah.
And it's very true. So I've taken up an awful lot of your time today, and I really appreciate you spending so much time with me. I find every bit of this fascinating. Maybe we can do it again sometime. But for now, I'm just going to ask you two more questions. Okay.
Sure.
And this is for bonus points. So get ready. The first of the last two questions is, what did you enjoy most about your years as a Lightkeeper?
I enjoyed the beauty, like, you know, when you're out there on the island and it's flat, calm, the seas are flat, no wind, and the natural beauty of it. You might have a humpback whale breaching a half a mile away from you, or icebergs. You know, I've counted up to 120 on a good day sometimes. Just the sheer beauty, you know, that was a bonus. The overhaul, you know, just doing my duty, helping out mariners, and if you could assist somebody in trouble, that made it special, right? So, you know, a combination of both of it. Sure.
And last question for extra bonus points is, would you do it all again if you could?
Yeah. looking back at it now, Jeremy, I would. You know, there was times you might have doubts about it, and sometimes when you're stuck on say Bacalao in a snowstorm, you know, you wish and pray, man. You say to yourself, what the heck am I doing on this rock, right? But in the big picture, it was worth it, and I would do it again. Yes.
Yeah, make some decisions might be a little different in retrospect, but
yes.
Yeah, it's interesting how you hesitated for just a moment there when I asked that question. So Barry Porter, thank you so much for spending so much time with me today. And as we talked about, let's see, I'm looking at the clock right now. We have talked for a little more than 2.5 hours. And I think this is my longest interview yet. I think you beat out Gerald Butler in Ireland by a few minutes. It's pretty close, but this will be 3 episodes in the podcast. And I really appreciate it. And I can't recommend the book enough. So if people listening to this again, you know, you might think, oh, well, okay, now you've heard it all. But there's more detail about some of these stories. And plus, there's a lot more stories in the book. So Adventures of a Lightkeeper, a memoir by Barry Porter, published by...
My publisher is Planker Press.
And it's a beautifully produced book. And, you know, there's been a number of books sort of like it by keepers in various countries. This is one of the best. Absolutely. I would rank it right up there with the best books of this type that have been written.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Thank you for writing the book. And thank you so much for being with me today. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Jeremy. Enjoyed it. Thanks for your interest, and enjoyed the chat.
Barry Porter tells us that if you contact him on Facebook, you can get a signed copy of his book directly from him. Just get on Facebook and do a search for Barry Porter author, and you'll find him. You can also buy the book from the publisher, Flanker Press, or from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online booksellers.
A big thank you to Barry Porter for sharing his stories with us. As I said in the interview, nobody should feel they've heard all of Barry's stories by listening to this podcast. There are a lot more stories in the book that we didn't even mention, including 2 dramatic rescues Barry did when he was off duty. There are also stories of his travels, including a cross-continent motorcycle trip. So if you like Barry's stories, you need to read the book. Next, we're going to have a short segment about Browns Head Lighthouse in Maine. Michelle, can you start by giving a little background about Browns Head?
I sure can, Jeremy. Vinyl Haven is a large island in the middle of Penobscot Bay, about 13 miles east of Rockland in Midcoast, Maine. Brown's Head Light Station was established in 1832 at the northwest corner of the island, and it was rebuilt in 1857. The 20-foot-tall cylindrical brick tower is attached to a wood-frame keeper's house. In 1987, Brown's Head became one of the last light stations in Maine to be automated. For many years, the station served as the residence of Vinyl Haven's town manager.
Ownership was transferred to the American Lighthouse Foundation in 2015, and it was recently transferred to Nick Korstad. Nick is the owner of the Big Bay Point Lighthouse Bed and Breakfast in Michigan, and he was also responsible for restoring Borden Flats Lighthouse in Fall River, Massachusetts. Regular listeners know he's been on the podcast a few times. I visited Brown's Head in April. I took some video while Nick and others were painting the lighthouse. We're going to hear 2 bits of audio from my visit now. First, here's a couple of minutes of Nick Korstad in the lantern room of the lighthouse next to the still active 4th Order Fresnel lens. So Nick, we're in the lantern room here. And what have you done up at this level in your stay this week?
Yeah, so the past couple of days our work has been on the outside. Again, the outside of the building had some deterioration going on. So got the rails scraped, got the gallery done, and cupola painted as well as around the windows. And unfortunately, we had rain when we came out here, so I couldn't do the caulking. The windows do need to be sealed and everything like that, and replace a couple of the windows. But once the weather permits and I have a little bit more time, we'll get out here, we'll get that taken care of. And then the goal is to actually replace these 3 windows behind me with glass, so that the classical lens can actually be seen from people coming to see the lighthouse. So we got 3 brand new windows downstairs.
Oh, wow.
So I'll get approval from the Coast Guard for that. I think we'll do Lexan actually back here maybe, just in case, so if someone wants to throw rocks. But you don't really see the lens, and I think that people don't, get to interpret how cool it is that the lens is still here. And in looking at this lens, if you look at it, it's in great shape. There's not really many chips on it. Being out here in its remote location, it's still serving its function, and I'm glad to see that the Coast Guard has no plans of taking it out. So if we can keep the lighthouse preserved, get the inside of this lantern room all cleaned, get all this wood stripped, the floor stripped, this pedestal, this should be a brass pedestal, I'm assuming, under here, get all that taken care of and get that shine back up and all the lead paint out of here, then this will be a great spot for tourists to come in. It won't be open every day, but once we get the house done, it'll be nice.
So ideally, you're going to have overnight stays in the house here, but possibly also some tours, maybe at certain times.
Yeah, we'd like to do some tours. This year, I'll be doing the main open Lighthouse Day. I got that week scheduled off, so we'll get some people to come up here, and then the main goal is get the house cleaned up and do a small, maybe a little bed and breakfast out here. And I've got some good ideas for that, but as lighthouses eat money, so they need to make money, and it's nice to just have someone on site all the time. It's not good to leave these buildings unattended, so it's the 5-year goal. The 5-year goal is to get that taken care of. But this is a great place. American Lighthouse Foundation did a great job of allowing me to take it over for them, so I can make it shine perfect for them too. Next, we're going to hear a short clip of Laurie McGee, who came with Nick from Michigan to Maine to help paint the lighthouse. I talked with her while she was applying paint to the lower part of the brick tower. So, Laurie, how do you like Maine? Is this your first time in Maine?
First time in Maine. I love it. It's gorgeous.
Yeah?
Gorgeous.
And how do you like working on a lighthouse?
Well, that's an experience too. I feel pretty lucky, actually.
Yeah. So you work for Nick back in
Michigan. Yep.
Yeah, Big Bay Point. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a really great opportunity. Somewhere I never thought I'd be, and being a part of working on a lighthouse, never dreamt.
Yeah. You were saying it's kind of similar to Michigan here, but you've got an ocean here and almost like an inland ocean there, but it's somewhat of a different feel to it.
A different feel, yes.
Yeah.
But it's pretty similar on some of the roads driving away from the ocean here. It looks like Michigan.
Yeah. Well, you guys have done a great job here this week.
It's actually kind of fun.
Yeah. You're probably going to hate to leave.
Yeah. Back to the snow.
So as you heard Nick say, in addition to restoring Browns Head Lighthouse and opening it for tours, he also plans to eventually make it available for overnight stays. We wish Nick all the best and will follow his progress closely.
On next week's episode of Lighthearted, we'll be listening to a conversation with Mike Vogel, president of the U.S. Lighthouse Society, and Jeff Gales, executive director of the Society. They'll be discussing the Society's tours and other aspects of the organization's mission.
To everybody out there who is working to preserve our history, thanks for everything you do. We're all on the same team. If you listen to this podcast with Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us.
Be sure to visit uslhs.org to learn more about preservation grants, the Passport Program, the Quarterly Journal, domestic and international tours, and everything else the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers. Memberships and donations help support this podcast.
Thanks for co-hosting once again, Michelle. And of course, thanks again to Barry Porter. And as always, to our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening and
keep a good light.